we want to talk today about some of the changes that are happening in our country, some of the big things that I'm actually really excited about and that I'm excited are finally happening, that we're finally like somebody cares and moving forward, that the word is getting out about it. So I'm sure everybody already knows kind of what we're talking about, but
Yeah.
with some of the changes that are happening in government, with food dyes specifically, and that whole genre of conversation. But I think
Right.
banning food dyes, I'm like, I didn't think it would happen really
Right.
this
And
fast
that
or this
quick.
soon and this quick.
Exactly.
Yeah. But here
Yeah.
we are. I'm
Yeah.
excited.
I am really excited too. And here's the thing I just kind of want to put out there is that I don't want to get political.
Yeah.
That's not what this is about. I'm just happy to see that our government is finally what it feels like finally has our back
Yeah.
when it comes to health and wellness, which is
Yeah.
something they have really missed for decades.
Yeah. And then it's
Or
somebody.
gaslighted us saying, sure, we have your back, but not really.
Yeah. Yeah. Or that it actually is validating the fact that this is a real concern and that
Yeah.
for a lot of years it hasn't been acknowledged. And here we are. Somebody is
Right.
finally being loud about
Right.
it and they're acknowledging it loud.
Exactly. So it's interesting because I know there have been just a host of people who have gone through in the past for decades saying that food dyes are horrible, the food preservatives are horrible, fluoride, all these things are toxic. Why is the FDA approving it? We know it causes cancer, this, that, the other, and why? What's going on? I don't understand.
Yeah.
It has been decades of people speaking up, writing books,
Yeah.
blogs, doing whatever they can to have this conversation, and yet somehow it never took. And the thing is, Americans, there's been a shift
Yeah.
from long ago when our political system was different. It was structured different. It was different, and people could really know that hey, the system has our back. Is really got our best interest at heart because it was that way, and then it shifted. And then all of a sudden, there were questions, and conspiracy theorists came up everywhere. And then you were the crazy conspiracy theorist if you say, food dyes are bad because
Well,
the FDA says it's good.
it's nothing new really for us, but we also tend to listen more to ourselves and our body and our
Yes.
intuition than anything, which is why you are a big believer in the intuitive diet.
Yes, exactly. So this is exactly what goes along with when you listen to your body, nature, something back to how things have been, plants in their natural state and food in its natural state is always going to support our body's best, right? So it's just interesting now that we finally got some big voices and paired with a couple other big voices that were already kind of coming up with this and saying things and getting big traction, and now we're seeing results.
Yeah.
I love this.
I want to go back and talk about kind of the beginning, like before a bunch of processed food was introduced, and right when we were on the precipice of moving into using things that were more processed, and what happened there in that moment, because I feel like there's a disconnect from nature, right? And then there's a desire though to see the beautiful things that are in nature, but because we're disconnected, we're making them in a false way, which is just so interesting and intriguing. It's like, it kind of reminds me of the Lorax.
Yeah.
Where they're like, we want to create fake worlds with fake plastic stuff.
Right.
To get the effect that we would have from something real in nature, but we killed that. So let's try to let's try to just make it a consumer driven thing. And anyway, I know that started way back in, you were telling me the 20s with
it's just different now than how it used to be. So, and that's a good example. I think there's a lot of things that actually come into play as to why that has transitioned that way. But here's an example, because I think setting these examples gives you an idea as to where we started, going in the wrong direction. In the 20s, there was this whole group of women called the Radium Girls, and I know a lot of people have, heard of this. They also were called the Glow Girls. These were women who would sit in factories, and it was their job to paint with radium the glow in the dark, numbers on the watches and clocks that we use, and that was a big thing, so that you could see your watch or your clock, or in the dark, right? It would glow in the dark. Well, we didn't know that that's actually really bad for you. And so there was no safety gear, there were no goggles, no gloves, nothing. And these women began to glow in the dark, literally, their own selves. And at first that was real funny and cute. And it became a desirable thing. I'm a radium girl. I glow in the dark. It was funny until years later, when the cancers and diseases began popping up for these women and they began dying.
Yeah. Well, and back then cancer was a lot less prevalent. So to have a large group of people that were all getting it.
Exactly. Huge. And that's when studies were put in place and they went, whoops, our bad, we didn't know. And then they put safeties in place.
Yeah.
The government said,
should be.
We learned, and now we know we don't do that, and we changed it, did something about it. Fast forward a few decades, where in, I believe it was 1948, Warfarin or Coumarin, which a lot of people use for a blood thinner. It's a blood thinner, very common. It came on the scene in 1948. It was actually approved as rat poison. That's where it came from. And it worked for rat poison. The reason they did not market it very well is because it took too long for the rats to eventually die of cancers and things. So they didn't know what to do with it. And lo and behold, in 1954, it then got approved for human usage, and it's been used for humans because they realized, oh, look, it's anticoagulant. This is great. It's blood thinner, amazing. We can use it in people. People are bigger. They're not like little rats. So the concentration's fine. Okay, how much poison is okay?
Yeah.
But this is what happened is they went, shh, it's fine. Sweeping it under the rug, getting it approved. So from the 20s to the 50s,
in that amount of time, it changed.
That's what happened. Wow. That's just an example. These are just examples of how things began to shift.
Yeah.
That shift is for so many reasons. We began pulling out of a different age. So we went, long ago we were in the agricultural age, way back with lords, and and then we ended up shifting over to the industrial age, and then each age kind of just shifted a bit.
Yeah.
Now we're in the digital age, but in between there was a shift where it's very much so about consumerism and money, because all of a sudden, once the industrial age was going, people realized they can go deeper and make money. Land of the free, land of the prosperous.
Yep.
Good old America. And it was about money, and that's when Rockefeller was in there and the big bucks started happening, and this was kind of coming on the scene a little more, right? And people wanted a piece of that apple pie money, right? The stock market's going crazy and all sorts of things happening to back that. And it made it easier for people to see the money and slip the other information under the rug.
Right. And I mean, I know there wasn't like a lot of information on dyes or studies on dyes and things like that back then. So, but now I feel like we have no excuse. There's so many studies. There's so much information out there that talks about it, and the effects on ADHD, and the effects on your skin, and the effects on your brain health, and the effects on your immune system. And there's so many ways that it affects you.
Exactly.
So now it's like, okay, I'm glad somebody's finally like, it's been how many years? It's been like 50 years. We have no excuse.
Yeah. Yeah. But you hit on one of the key problems is, back in the beginning, the FDA did not require testing,
right,
or even stringent testing. Just here's a few little lab notes we made, it's fine, we can use it, and the FDA goes, okay, approved. Then the FDA became more stringent about, no, we need so many studies, so many years out, we need to see what happens in 1 year, in 2 years with these things that are going to be consumed in the body. Then it became we're just going to go and approve this early. for Americans because the money's
because they
it.
want it, and we don't have the time to wait 5 years to see how this dye affects somebody's brain health 5 years later. And also it was probably in a lot less stuff when it first was like happening, right? It wasn't in as much stuff, it wasn't as readily available, but now you can pick up 5 out of 10 items from the grocery store and sorry, you can pick up 10 items and like 5 to 8 of them have a dye in them,
exactly, or preservatives, and it's horrifying.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So it actually, so for example, we'll just get into red dye number 3. That is the first thing that was banned or put into legislation.
Yay.
To get banned. Yay, red dye number 3. We have known for decades it was banned for cosmetic use. That's where it started, to be used in lipsticks and blush and women's cosmetics. And they went, no, it soaks into the skin and it causes cancer. But we're going to later approve it for food. And what happened? The shift is, honestly, the food manufacturers, the big food manufacturers, had more money to fight it in legislation than the cosmetic industry back then had it in the beginning to fight it. And so what happened was, hey, Procter & Gamble, General Mills, all the big guys said, we need this approved. We're big money. And now we back you, Senator. We back you, all the people that are making the legislation.
Right.
We're backing you and funding you. And it became really convoluted. That's a huge red flag, because then people realize the FDA can be bought.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean,
that's
we talked about that a little bit on our last podcast, was like, they don't really know what they're approving. So
now they don't.
Yeah.
And we saw that with the pandemic.
Yeah.
We're not going into details, and that was 5 years ago. And we all went, wait, we did not approve that study. There's no study. What happened? I'm confused, right? So we saw that, and now we're seeing the repercussions of it, unfortunately. But this shows us what happens there with what's approved, what's not. So, the dyes. Okay. So let's just look at that, because that's where we've started, and I love it. It's a great place to start.
Yeah.
The red dye number 3, there are other dyes now that are following, soon to follow.
Yeah.
Thank God that they're working on the legislation, and it takes a while to get those things written up and put out there.
Right.
But in Europe, red dye number 3, red dye number 40, yellow dye number 5, and yellow dye number 6, which are the top 4 worst food dyes, have been banned in the entire country since the 90s, the early 90s.
Yeah. And I mean, that's when I was born. So early 90s, right? So now a whole generation and a half of people have lived with something that was already banned.
Yes.
For like half of my lifetime.
Exactly. Which means
more than
how much, which means how much solid lab testing and report, scientific documentation was there to show before the 90s for the entire country to ban it.
Yeah.
And we had access to that same information. And we just approved it. Shh, it's fine. Sweep it under the rug.
Yeah.
That's a long time. Here what's happening, it's interesting, because here what's happening in the States, it's happening per state and not across the entire country. So our government has chosen to go, we're going to do this, and only one thing is being put out there for the entire country right now. As of right now, that's red dye number 3. But the rest of it that's following is being put out per state. It's interesting to me.
That's so interesting, because it's like, oh, what if those companies don't have, you know what I mean? Like, what? Okay, so those companies just sell to all the states that are okay with it now, and it's like, what if you live in one of those states? That's so unfortunate. Like, people got to move just so that they don't have to have dyes in their stuff, That's so crazy.
It is. So here's the problem, right? So it's 2 years out for the big companies to make the changes, and actually before it's legitimately banned, because big companies like General Mills and Procter & Gamble, they have to have time, change their formulas, and repackage, rebrand, remake everything without that. So I understand there has to be a transition. I'm not sure that 2 years is needed. I think one's plenty, but I get it. So during that time, people are still under the assumption then right now, today, they're going to go to the grocery, they're going to go shopping, and there's no red dye number 3 in things. And that's not true. It's everywhere. It's still there on the shelf. There. It absolutely
you still have to read the label.
It absolutely is. Yeah. So here's the interesting thing before I even get into further stuff, because I want to talk about this a little bit.
Yeah.
There are actually people who are really kind of resisting this, believe it or not, in America.
Really? I don't think I've heard of those people.
Yeah. So
maybe because I just stay away from them.
it's the resistance is coming from a place of, I don't want the government to tell me what I can and can't do. It's there. It should be my choice. Okay, I understand that. But here's the problem. We already know this causes cancer, disease, illnesses, ADHD, autism, all these problems. We know for a fact, and the undereducated and the young, who are the most influential or kind of stuck, are the ones that get targeted for these products.
Yep.
They're the ones that are like, let me have my soda, my potato chips, my, candy and colors of the rainbow. And it's an educational thing. They may not truly understand, but this really does cause cancer. And we know that. Here's the statistics.
Yeah.
No, we've been eating it for fine. We're fine. My whole family's been eating it for decades. We're fine. But are you, though?
Right. Well, what does that do to your genetics that then you pass down? Like we were talking last time with epigenetics, it's just, you turn on something with the red dye 3, for example, and, it triggers ADHD in you maybe. And then the next generation gets that triggered gene that's turned on. They get that plus even more bombarding from even more dyes and more frequently and more aggressively. Right. And then how do they respond and react? Exactly. I've known whole families who have cut out dyes completely for their kids because they're like, dyes and sugar, they're like, they just act too crazy. And it's just, people don't know that.
Right. I mean, they just recently did a big step. Well, they did the study years ago, but they recently re-released it, showing that if they put kids, just typical kids, off of all dyes and preservatives and junk food, and they just put them on whole food diet for 30 days, more than 50% of them do not have ADHD symptoms anymore. And those that do have it are way less.
Right. More easily managed.
So we've known this for a while too.
Well, and a lot of them, they don't even know how to self-regulate themselves yet, right? Like they don't know how to notice, like when I eat this, it causes this. So it's really the parents' jobs to help them do that. And by that, I mean, it's their job to read the labels, because right now, until this movement has started, we haven't been necessarily protected against that.
Exactly. And it goes back to education again. And the problem is kids get targeted to the colorful candies, the funky rainbow colors in their sugary cereals, all the funky, neon colored drinks and sodas. And that's amazing because it's very eye-catching for children. And children can just be unbelievably relentless about, I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this.
Right.
And parents are so exhausted. It's easier to give in because it's so readily available. And every checkout, counter at every grocery store, what do you see right there while you're waiting in line within eye level and reach of your children?
And you don't want them to feel like they're missing out, and I get that. But I'm happy that there's like alternatives now, and also teaching them the self-regulating or self-evaluating skills. Because I remember when I was a kid, I was like, I drank. I was an athlete, played sports, right? And so I would drink Gatorades because I would get like really low blood sugar. So I would drink Gatorade, and I'd feel like I needed electrolytes, so I drink Gatorade. And, I eventually learned, and I started only drinking like the one that was not colored, not dyed, because I was like, oh, the one makes my throat scratchy. And then the other one, I was like, oh, it makes me super hyper. And then I crash really hard.
Right.
And that was the red dye one, actually.
Exactly. It's funny when my kids are in their 20s now, but when they were little, they're only a year apart. I used to tell people, I've got one kid who totally can't do red dye and the other one totally can't do blue dye. And people looked at me like I was an alien, And I remember one day having this play date with another mom and her two children. They were all about the same age, and the toddler, age 3 and 4, my kids, right? Little guys. We went out to some little cafeteria style where we could at least get some vegetables kind of place. They're all sitting down, and my kids wanted the Jello, the neon colored Jello. And the other mom was went first, and her kids picked the Jello. Then my kids want to do the same.
Right.
I want the Jello. That's and I was like, that's not a good idea. My kids are it'll make them bounce off the walls. You don't understand. She was like, oh, they're just kids. It's a little Jello. Come on, let them have it. I'm like, okay. So we sit down.
You asked for this.
My kids eat, and we were it wasn't 15 minutes after my kids eating the Jello, they were totally different human beings, bouncing off the walls, throwing stuff up, around, screaming, wah! And that woman looked at me and goes, you're not kidding.
Well, if everyone could see that moment, right? For their kids, but it's almost like we're so used to it now.
Exactly.
It's like, oh, they're just kids.
Yeah.
No.
Because actually, the moment they start getting finger foods to kids, do you know what some of the first finger foods are that little toddlers, 1.5 years, get? Goldfish crackers. Wonder how many food dyes and preservatives are in those?
Yep.
But they're so cute.
Lollipops.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. So these are the first foods. So you don't know what your kid is actually like without them, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah. Unless you're a bubble kid, right? And your body is like, I can't do that,
and then bubble kids get made fun of. Because when my kids were younger, I don't want to be the hippie granola kid, Mom. My friends make fun of me. Well, that's what happens, and it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that children have to feel like they choose,
or like they're missing out, because realistically it's just that their body is going to work better.
Every single birthday party my kids got invited to, I'm bringing their own cupcakes or their slice of cake. My kids felt like the weirdo.
We still do that now, right? I just did that on Sunday. I brought my own cookie and ice cream to a birthday party.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
But way back then, 20 years ago, oh my gosh, she's that mom. And my kids felt horrible. Peer pressure is real, and the kids don't know better because they just know they want what they want. They have to be taught. No. Yeah. But when all the other kids are doing it, and they're not kidding, all the other kids are doing it. Ooh.
Yep.
That's hard.
It is hard. And it's hard too when your family unit or system is not educated on it either.
Exactly.
Because I know that mine wasn't.
No, mine either.
It was not like that. We didn't know anything about that. It was me kind of just being like, I don't like the way I feel on that. People say that I act crazy on that, so not going to do that.
Right.
Or that one gives me a skin rash. Not going to do that.
And I was always on this health kick and do things natural for in my 20s, sure, it really took off. And I remember being that collegian person. I'd come home from college and my whole family's there, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, and I would be the one preaching, you shouldn't eat that, you should totally change that, that's going to make you have inflammation in your body. Nobody wanted to hear that. And then I noticed after a few gatherings, no one wants to talk to me. And I learned pretty early on, it took me a while to not say anything, but simply show up and be like, I have my own food. Cool. Thanks. This is what I'm doing. I'm going to make these choices instead. I feel better. Thanks.
Yeah.
And then I thought, I'm just going to hold the silver platter. And someday I'm hoping they come to me. Yeah. But then years later,
they always do. Yeah.
They come calling me, hey, so I have this new disease and this new autoimmune disorder. Can you help me? So that's what I learned. It really does help. But it's that peer pressure. But it always, truly, if you follow the money, that's where you're going to see what happens. So we kind of touched on this a few minutes ago, how big companies had to make changes, right? Yeah. And go, oh gosh. So there's also been changes since the 50s in recipes of things.
Right,
and they've
right.
gotten way worse. And I can think of two
We've
examples.
all seen them online, right? That's really actually big online right
Totally.
now. A lot of people are
Huge.
posting the pictures of like what was in the
Yeah.
50s and what's now in that
Exactly.
same product.
Exactly. So McDonald's French fries, when they first came on the scene, had like 7 ingredients. Beef tallow, potato, salt. It had a preservative or two,
Real
but it was
food with a
pretty.
couple of
Yeah.
extras. Yeah.
Now those same fries are like 20 some odd ingredients that you can't even pronounce.
Mhm.
Okay, the reason for that was chemicals are cheaper
Exactly.
and they have less waste. And so having less waste, you're throwing away less, you have higher profit margin.
Right.
That's what happened. Gatorade, when Gatorade first came on the scene, there was no funky color, and its original actual recipe was, sugar, salt, electrolytes. It was very real. It actually came about from an athletic coach, and that he went, yeah, we really need to replenish, and it was pretty decent for what it was.
Yeah.
And now every color under the sun with so many ingredients that you can't pronounce, and that's why Gatorade is under so much of the gun right now, because of the food dyes and the colors and the horrible things, and they see it's not good for you because it's being fed to athletes.
Well, and
as something healthy.
A lot of athletes, they actually, right, like that's a big thing that companies do, is they get the athletes to get up there and promote their product. Exactly. And they have a video of them going, wow, I'm the best athlete you can think of, and I just took a drink of this to help me replenish. Exactly. And it makes you want to do it, right? Yeah, that's exactly. A marketing tool. Right. But unfortunately, these athletes, they don't know what it's actually doing to them.
Exactly.
So it's many education. Of them. Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I'm so glad that so much education is coming out now on it, because it's not like something that's just for hippie people anymore.
Right, exactly.
Or for people that are like, I have to do this for my, my kid to not be crazy. It's like, no, really, it should be for your health, for everyone, because sometimes it doesn't show up right away. Some people it does, and other times it doesn't. Like you said, like the radium girls. Yeah. It came up later. It took time for them to realize, wow, this causes disease.
Exactly.
And so I'm glad that they're finally doing something, saying something for information we've known for years.
Exactly. And it's time for that. I mean, there are other programs like the SNAP programs, in America. There are states starting to immediately ban
Good for them.
Junk food, certain preservatives, and food dyes being paid for through SNAP.
Good for them. Good.
Texas is one of them. Arkansas. There's several states that are like, we're on it. But again, it's per state thing right now, which is interesting to me. So Mexico, the whole country of Mexico has it in legislation right now to ban junk food and food dyes in all their schools.
It's like almost surprising to me, because you hear so much about, like, a lot of people are afraid to even go to Mexico, right? But then you're like, wow, but their government like kind of has it down.
Yeah.
Like they don't allow GMOs. Yeah. Like no GMO corn. Like they're just like banning all the food dyes in schools where you're more sensitive when you're a kid, right? Absolutely. And way more sensitive now, especially with all that they're bombarded with. The childhood prevalence of disease has gone up significantly in our country, so we should be protecting them most of all.
Exactly. Their bodies are still
the best food possible.
Exactly. The problem with targeting kids with all of these food dyes and preservatives and junk food is that their bodies are still developing, and a large percent of the preservatives and food dyes are neurotoxins. And these kids' brains are not fully finished developing until they're in their 20s, early 20s.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Right.
We're making literally dumbing down of America.
Through food.
That's what it does, through the chemicals through our food. All that's just for $1 for the big companies.
Right. And that's just one realm of health. That's just one piece. That's not even including the bombarding of the social media and instant gratification, and then the chemicals that we're introduced to today that we never were introduced to before, and the like lack of trees as well that cleanse the air, right? Okay. Like all of the oil spills that have happened in our waters, like things like that. It's not even taking those into account. And that adds up more and more and more and more and more.
Exactly.
And we wonder why this allergy season, we're all like, oh, my eyes,
Exactly, yeah. But, it's because our immune systems have taken such a hit. We can't mitigate normal things like pollen now. That's the problem.
Yeah.
And so it's just interesting how things have evolved or de-evolved, in my view. De-evolved.
I think that's the right word.
To to where we are. And I'm so glad to see now that our country is actually doing something to try to make a change. I understand it's going to be a while. I understand it's a process. Do I think it's all perfect? No. Do I think, the current political administration's got it down? No, I don't. But I feel like we're headed back in a better direction that it needs to be. And then once we educate people, it's hard to unlearn what you've already learned.
Yeah, and there's a huge movement right now too, even in people in my generation that are wanting to learn homesteading. They're wanting to learn the things that our great grandparents knew and did, because it's almost like we lost that.
We did.
And to go back to those roots, it's like it's helping us in so many ways. And then it's also just they're complementing each other, moving away from dyes and back to real food, back to real nutrition, back to real things that our body can actually handle. And reversing some of that disease process that we've been building on.
There's been this whole huge movement after the industrial age. We kind of went into this age of misinformation, where when social media came up and misinformation could happen, and I'm just saying this like it's real and no one's fact checking, but anybody can say anything on social media, and then it gets shared and we don't know what's real and what's not. So misinformation was shared. So,
and lack of reading, I will say. Like, like nobody's like, I pick up a book just to learn anymore. And there are people, of course, but a lot of people are like, I'll just look it on Google.
Exactly.
Or Wikipedia, where you can put in anything you want.
Exactly. But it's been a disconnect of people, community, back in the old self-sustaining skills of, this is how I care for myself and my family.
Right.
Basics, which is homesteading, but it's also, like you were saying, reading books and learning for yourself and doing for yourself. The disconnect happened when we industrialized food a little too much in the 50s, where we removed the farmer from the direct purchasing of the consumer.
Right.
And big groceries came in place. And you can't ask the questions, hey, farmer, what'd you do with this? Hey, and the farmer can't say, look, this beetle came and took out the squash crops. That's why I don't have any now. So instead we've got this. And the big companies, food companies, came in and they wanted to standardize everything. This is how preservatives and food dyes came about. And then we didn't realize that, because now we've disconnected from our farmer. We don't have that information anymore. Is to why maybe we're not supposed to be eating squash right now. It's not in season, or the beetles got it. Instead, we really need to be focusing on eating this. And we lost those skills because of that disconnect.
Right.
So I'm very happy to see it's making a resurgence in learning how to care for ourselves again. Victory gardens are coming back, which is thank God, because there's a lot going on with the tariffs coming down the pike that people don't realize are going to be happening soon. And that's something that actually takes effect in April 2nd.
So in 2 days.
So 2 days from now. But that means by the time this goes out, it's in effect. And nobody's sure what that's going to look like. So I know from our suppliers, Mexico is one of the companies or countries that the tariffs are being put on. So Mexico,
hopefully too many Texan people don't jump right on hating us. Give us a moment to talk about it.
Right. Hold on. So Mexico is so close to Texas. So for Texans to get their food from California, say, is way longer food travel than Mexico. Mexico actually has way more stringent organic and non-GMO laws.
And the longer it travels, correct me if I'm wrong, the longer that it travels, the more nutrients we lose from the food.
Absolutely.
So it's better if we can get it closer and organic and non-GMO.
So what's happening right now with Mexico, for example, Mexico is so unsure of what's going to happen because the price is going to have to raise. It's not just organics, it's all produce. The price is going to raise on certain things so much. They're afraid people are just not going to buy it. So they are holding back and not harvesting right now large amounts of things. Therefore, that is going to cause a little more of a scarcity and hard to find and source produce in America, Texas specifically. And therefore, prices will not just go up because of the tariffs. They're going to go up because we don't have access to them right now for things. I understand the point of the tariffs is, we can and should be growing this food in our own country more and these certain things that we consume and take care of ourselves. Yes, but we're not, it's so uncertain how this is going to play out that there's going to be a transition time that they're predicting really high price rates in like avocados and tomatoes and peppers and things you don't really think of but you use in everything. Okay, tomatoes are in everything. If you're from Texas, avocados and tomatoes are in most everything you're making. I mean, really. So what's that going to look like for restaurants? What's that going to look like for people who are to standardize things and this is our recipe and we sell millions of these and now we can't source these ingredients, or we do but it's literally double the price.
Right. Yeah. So, and that's because you were saying like we've had that disconnect where a lot of people don't grow those types of things in massive amounts near us not in this area. I mean, first of all, our climate, and then add on top of that like that disconnect and also overpopulation, like all of us just moving into all of the areas that used to be farm. Right now we don't have access to that anymore, so it's like, okay, where are we going to get it? And
exactly. Well, and two other things come into place. One is food waste. We don't really look at our food waste, but it is huge in America. In other countries, it's not. We throw away so much food. We don't even think about it. Our eyes are bigger in our stomachs. We get too much. Oh, toss it. You know how much that'll change when that avocado and tomato cost you XYZ. No, you're going to eat it all, right? The other thing is victory gardens. So that used to happen in the 50s, 40s.
What is the victory garden?
Victory garden is when we went to war. World War II, it was really hard to come across things, and every family was like, you have to do your part because financially we're all strapped, and every family was encouraged to have a garden, to grow food for them own selves and their neighbors and swap out, because a lot of the people who were farming are off at war. And so the women would stay back and the children, and they grew victory gardens, and then they would swap with their neighbors cucumbers for tomatoes and whatnot. And this was a thing that every
trade system
had. Every household had, and we all knew how to grow food. So now is the time that victory gardens are making a resurgence, and they should.
It's amazing.
They should.
I love that.
We should know how to grow our own food and what that looks like, and then we'll start to see just how diseased our soil is and what it looks like to amend it naturally. You know,
regenerative farming, that's a whole nother topic that we can talk about, and that I would love to try to have somebody on to talk about, because it's huge. Really necessary. But I mean, I know that not everybody has a naturally green thumb, but it's like that's why places like this are important, because we're having a meeting this afternoon with some people from our community, some of our volunteers, that they love to garden and they're good at it. And I would say that I'm not naturally good at gardening vegetables. I can grow plants, but that's not my natural skill set, and I'm not from this area. So for me to try to learn it could take a lot more than just learning from somebody. And that's that connection we've been missing. That one-on-one connection and teaching. Yes. And almost skills. Like that, apprenticeship of community and learning from somebody else how they do something, so that we can all share this skill set. We can all benefit, and we can all be successful when it comes to food.
Exactly. And I feel like it's going to shift things to time focused on doing things for yourselves a little more self-sustaining. Well, it should. But
I definitely already see that happening. I mean, I have friends who they already want to just start whole communities just that live and do that. So
exactly. I mean, so this is good to see that resurgence. I'm really glad to see that. But I'm really glad to see things are shifting in a better way for food dyes, for preservatives. Fluoride in water is also a thing coming up. Utah just put into legislation to ban fluoride in all their water for the whole state. Great. Because we've known fluoride is a neurotoxin for decades. And the guy who actually discovered it long ago, thinking this is beneficial because it really helps with certain things. After he discovered it and released it, he said, no, I didn't mean for you to put it in water. It's for tooth stuff and external use, and not to put it to drink it and consume it. He tried to tell them it's a neurotoxin that affects the brain. They shut him up, discredited him, and he disappeared.
Oh,
Therefore, decades later, we all just went, shh, it's good for you. You need it.
Well, and comparatively looking at that then and looking at where we're at now, like, wow, what a blessing. Like we have people who are standing up, and it's enough now. It's enough people together that it's not just one person and that everyone's like, ah, you're crazy, bye.
Yeah,
quiet you up. But now it's people that are grouping together, and we're saying, no, this is a thing, this is happening. And we're lucky and blessed in that way, because, people like you in Australia, what is her name, Barbara O'Neill, she was basically excommunicated from her country because of her beliefs.
Too boisterous about these things.
And I'm just like we're lucky that we do live here in a place where we're able to talk about this, where we're able to
share
have these things happening.
Exactly. Have people out there that we can listen to freely and have that access to, like podcasts and YouTube and social media used in a good way. Like Callie and Casey Means, they've got great information. They started months and months and months ago to plant the seeds of these ideas. We have access to that now. We have access to books and all sorts of information. And I love that we are finally coming back around to gathering as a community for our own health and for our own good.
Yeah.
I love seeing that.
Realizing how important it is. So
I'm glad to finally see this. So
I think we'll have some good things moving forward when it comes to our country. We'll just, wait to see what else happens, and
and how we can all personally, individually get involved.
Exactly.
And make these things happen for the health of us now and our future.
And educate ourselves,
That's it.
And other people with love.
Exactly.
Through love.
Exactly. So,
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, thank you. This has been great. I just love sharing this information with other people. So,
same.
So glad that we can get this information out and kind of talk about what's happening.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.